My name is Marije Groen, and today we welcome Lydia Houweter to talk about the relationship between impact investment and biotechnology. As Senior Investment Manager at Pictet Asset Management, Lydia focuses on healthcare and biotechnology strategies. Lydia, welcome. It's really great to have you.
Thank you.
I can imagine you must feel fortunate to have such a fascinating set of companies to research and invest in. It must be quite amazing to meet management teams that are making progress in addressing serious diseases around the world and seeing your investments directly benefiting patients. So tell us, what is the relationship between impact investment and biotechnology?
So I would say in general for biotech, the impact is pretty direct and pretty clear. As you can imagine, you have drugs that are being developed and are being approved because they have proven their efficacy. So you know that the products that you have in the industry are having an impact. I think where we can actually make this even more interesting for investors to really know that their money is put somewhere where money is needed, it's really focusing on disease areas that are very high in their unmet need. So basically, areas that don't have treatments that are either effective enough or have no treatments at all, and also are accessible to people. I think this is a rising concern in healthcare generally, but especially in some markets, is that as new medicines are quite expensive, people don't have access to them. Now, I don't think our role is to decrease drug prices. I don't think that's an investor type of engagement that we do. But what we think is really important is for companies to show how their drugs are adding value to the system. And that is quite a simple mathematical way to do things. It's really to look at the totality of the costs that is arising from a certain disease and show that the drug, by maybe curing the disease or reducing other healthcare costs like hospitalizations or visits to the emergency room, that actually, even though the price is pretty high, the net cost to society is low. And that's what we're focusing on. So we have actually developed kind of an impact framework for biotech, right, where we look at 4 different parameters. So the first one really is, what is the unmet need? So how big is the unmet need? And we try to focus here on diseases that are severe, that can be life-threatening or have a severe impact on quality of life. So let's say some company is developing a drug for a toenail fungus that would not meet our criteria because there's generic drugs that help for that, etc. And you're not going to die of a toenail fungus. But then on the other hand, you have rare genetic diseases that are really crippling to people, or even things that are life-threatening like cancer that would score pretty high. So that's the first, the unmet need. The second one is on efficacy. So we try to focus on companies that have therapeutics that don't just improve symptoms. So we want to have medicines that really do something to change the disease, and in the best case, to cure the disease. So curative will always have a very high impact. And that's really important. And I think in our society today, we don't pay enough for curative treatments because you only get a one-time payment, right? And then your patient is cured, or maybe you're for a short period of time, as opposed to chronic therapy, like for instance, diabetes or so, where you get paid every single year. So that's where the money is made right now in the industry. So we really like curative therapies, but sometimes the economics don't work out. And I think that's one point where probably as a society, we also need to rethink how we look at these things. But on our impact score, they will score high. Then the third one is the competitive situation. So we really like companies that are trailblazers, that go into areas that others have not dared. Maybe they're really hard to treat diseases. It's hard to do innovation in those spaces. For example, the neuropsychiatric area was one where we haven't seen much innovation because so many trials failed. And we really like companies that are not deterred from these hard to tackle areas. And on the plus side for investors, also on a return profile, these companies are really differentiated once they're successful because nobody else is in that space. So again, trailblazers will score high on impact. And then the fourth and very important one is patient access. And here we have actually a consultancy that we work with. They're called Real Endpoints. And they are a consultancy that works with industry normally, and they look at insurance reimbursement of drugs. So we work with them to try to get a sense of what's the insurance companies thinking of this drug price? Would they reimburse it? What could be the hurdles for patients to not get access to it? And we're very, very aware of this phenomenon that we have seen rise in especially the United States, of this, what we call financial toxicity. So it's not drug toxicity, it's really the financial toxicity that comes with medical treatments. And it's because in the US, the system has moved towards more and more self-payment by the patient. So either you have insurances with very high deductible plans where you have a high portion of the treatment that you need to pay yourself, which essentially keeps patients from getting the drug. So here we really try to focus on companies that find solutions to get patients access, be it over free drug programs, over patient assistance, etc. So that's kind of our impact framework.
Wow, that's an excessive and very clear framework, the way you explained it. I can imagine it helps to cure, to look at things better if it's organized in such a way. Well, talking about current events, you already said you're looking at diseases that impact the world heavily. Well, obviously, COVID-19 is new on the horizon, but definitely impacting a lot of people. What do you consider to be the most promising opportunity for research into a drug or vaccine against this virus?
There's a lot of promising angles. And I like to say on this that it's not going to be one thing that's going to solve this crisis. It's not going to be the one vaccine that's going to win everything and solve the crisis. It's not going to be the one treatment, but really a multidisciplinary, multifactorial way of dealing with this. And we're already seeing that. I mean, the biggest impact right now have been social measures, really the social distancing and like keeping the virus at bay. We have seen the first studies from vaccine test candidates with actually pretty novel technology that have shown that they can make neutralizing antibodies. And that's the kinds of antibodies that you need to basically cover the surface of the virus so it cannot enter the cells of the body. So that's
if
really
you have
promising.
to do an estimate. If you have to do an estimate, how long do you think we are away from getting such a vaccine, or is that very difficult to tell?
Again, it's not a simple answer because having a vaccine is one thing. So you need to prove it's safe. That will take probably a couple of months to have like an initial read. And then we need to know if we can manufacture it at a sufficient scale. And that's another whole different task, especially with novel technology like the one that Moderna is using. We don't really know how quickly we can ramp up the capacity. What's the stability of the drug? Do you need to keep it in a cold chain? Can you just transport it at room temperature, etc.? Like there's so many logistical steps that you need to think through, or even the vials. So people across the world are now hunting for glass vials to put the vaccine in. So there's like very
practical consequences.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I do believe that we will have a viable, or not just one, probably several viable vaccines in probably the beginning of next year already. And the question will be the scale up on manufacturing and how we can fairly distribute this across the world.
And is the biotech sector already operating at full capacity, do you think, now?
Yeah, well, for coronavirus research, for sure, they're doing everything that they can. Other areas, we have seen some delays in clinical trials where it's not the sector per se that is shut down, but really the clinical trial sites, so the hospitals and places where people go to take part in studies, etc. So we've seen some companies have delays of a couple of months for that. But on the research side, yes, I mean, people are working day and night and all weekends just to find a solution. And I'm proud to say that even in our portfolio, I've looked at the holdings that we have, and over a third of our portfolio companies have at least something that they're trying. So trying their drugs, trying stuff in their pipeline to see if it could have an effect. So everybody tries to help. But these things just take a little bit of time because you do want to make sure it's safe. I mean, we had the whole issue with hydroxychloroquine, again, where people had like some initial evidence that was anecdotal. And then now we have the large scale studies and we can see that it actually could have a detrimental effect because it kind of risks people having cardiovascular safety side effects. So we really need
there's
to
a
make
lot
sure
of different things that come into play. Yeah, I hear you.
Done properly. Yeah.
If we look then beyond the crisis, biotech has shown near-term defensive qualities and long-term growth prospects driven by innovation and society secular demand. What are your expectations for the sector going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, biotech has a very, very strong fundamental driver, and that's innovation. It's really the progress we have on the scientific fields. And on that side, I have to say it's really, truly amazing to see how many new technologies are coming out, like the deepening understanding of how biology works, how the genetic system works, interacts with diseases, and finding new disease pathways that we can look at. So from that side, you have a very strong tailwind helping the sector. On the other hand, you do have always a political framework where you're acting in. And we've seen in the last presidential election, so in 2016, drug prices were really at center stage. So Hillary Clinton had this one tweet where she was saying that basically people are charging way too much for the drugs, which at some examples she had a point. It was actually true. And so there has been a lot of talk about that even in the last 4 years. And I think we have a unique opportunity right now to kind of showcase the importance of having a healthy biopharma industry. So I'm hoping that this discussion going forward will shift again towards what the discussion was during the Obama administration, which was around access. And Biden, obviously, he's now leading in most of the polls. He will probably expand a lot of what Obama did. So he already talked about expanding the Affordable Care Act, so Obamacare, maybe lowering the age for Medicare, which is the health insurance for all people. So you'll have an expansion of the patient population that you actually can give treatment to. Even if you have to make some concessions on price, the idea is that you can offset that with volume and everybody benefits from that because, I mean, the pharma industry really wants to get the patients access to their medicines. Mm. So I think reform there can actually be a net positive to the industry. Mm.
And is it fair to say that the most developments will happen now in the upcoming 5 to, say, 10 years, where we see new technologies such as gene therapy, gene editing, that will create new medications to cure those life-threatening diseases? How do you look at that development?
Yeah, we really are in a wave of these genetic medicines. That's absolutely true. I mean, we've now basically cracked how to deliver gene therapies. That's not to say that they can't be improved over time, because we've seen that some of the first ones, they lose a bit of efficacy over time. But still, I mean, it's really life-changing for these patients who have genetic diseases that were not druggable, that were not targetable before. And now you have this mechanism of how to bring in missing genes. So I think genetic medicine is a huge segment to grow in the future. And it's a specialist segment for biotech companies. So they're very strong in this field. And I think the next 10 years are probably going to bring a lot of good genetic medicines. Yeah.
Let's hope so. So let's talk more strategy. Which strategies does Pictet Asset Management actually use to capitalize on the biotechnology sector? It's really finding, as I said, this whole impact thing goes into the strategy as well. We want to find drugs that really add value
and by that create value to society and create value to shareholders. So the way we look for these companies, typically we like companies that are not on the market yet. They have they're in a phase 2, phase 3 clinical trial phase. So they're in human trials. They have generated some proof of concept data that we can analyze and that we can discuss with experts, with our wide network of physicians that we talk to. And then from there, we try to estimate the probability that this drug is going to work and that this drug is going to be big based on the clinical profile. And then, I mean, the majority of our work is really scientific and clinical. So looking at the disease, and that's the really fascinating part of it. And then obviously you do the financial part, you do discounted cash flow models, and you see kind of the fair value that you want to pay for the company. But it's really finding these innovation drivers.
Yeah. So I can imagine it starts with the companies, but then, and you look at the most promising ones, the ones that are doing a lot of good stuff, which is already a challenge in itself, I can assume. And then you have to go to stock selection. How do you determine the stock selection?
It's really based on the drug assets that they have. We do the discounted cash flow of every single drug that they have in the pipeline. So the valuations on the stock it is based on these drugs. But obviously you also look at things like the management quality, the kind of track record that they had in the industry. We have our standard ESG vectors that we look at. We kind of try to look at things like diversity, etc. They don't go into the scoring system. They're more in the background right now, but we look at all of that. And then we have a quantitative overlay that we do for all thematic equities, because biotech is part of the thematic equities framework. So we have things like volatility that we will look at. We even look at forward-looking volatility, so implied volatility to position size, because biotech can be quite binary in movement. So we try to kind of minimize that as much as we can. And we look at liquidity, etc., to then size the position in the portfolio.
Thank you so much. This has been really insightful, and best of luck with creating that value and also, getting access to the data you need in order to do that. I would like to thank my guest, Lydia Houwetter, Senior Investment Manager at Pictet Asset Management, for her insights. This interview about impact investing is offered to you by Pictet Asset Management. It was recorded as part of the Impact Week of Fonds News. For more interviews on impact investing, please visit fondsnews.nl. If you would like to know more about thematic investing or about investing in biotech, please visit the website of Pictet Asset Management Netherlands, am.pictet/nl.